was going to say is that I learned calligraphy and how to play with words back in my high school days from a Benedictine sister, Sister Thomas Carey. And that just continued on in my life from time to time. I did artwork. And then when I went to Snowmass for the first time in 1987 for my first retreat with Father Thomas, well, that was a watershed experience, meeting and being with him and Pat Johnson and Sarah. I was just taken with his words. And I think I shared this before, but I'm going to say it again. I think this is a quote from one of the Psalms. I believe it is. O God, thou didst strike my heart with thy word, and I loved thee. And for me, listening to Father Thomas at the retreats, the gatherings, the conferences, it was like his word just struck me in the heart. And I found myself during these times taking copious notes, but also at the same time using my pen to art right there while I was listening to Father Thomas. And I experienced him as a person with great love, very deep love. He was brilliant, but the Holy Spirit kind of transformed that brilliance into the brilliance of love that he had for all of us. And I believe that that is what Father Thomas was trying to teach us, how to love, how to open to the Spirit with our hearts in our minds and let go of the exaggerated needs for power, self-esteem, and security. And in that transformation, learning how to give ourselves to that love.
Can I creating this piece?
This piece you will not find in any of his books. This came from one of the gatherings, and I think it might have been the late 90s or the early 2000s. And I think Sister Virginia might have been present for that gathering also. But I just remember listening to him. And when he said this, the love of God cradles us unceasingly, it just caught me. And I wrote it down. And then I took my paints and my ink when I got home, and I just played with it. You know, his words for me have really become Lectio Divina that I carry around in my heart. And I often remember during the days, my ordinary days. And I think the artist can express emotion and insight through color. And, well, for me, as a calligrapher, through the arrangement of words. And these things just came to me. And I know it was a gift from the Spirit through Father Thomas. Wondering do you have anything to say, Virginia, about listening to Father Thomas and being with him?
I'm just wondering, is this the time that we went as presenters for a special meeting and he shared the jumpy mouse?
No, that was another time.
Yeah.
But
well, I'll share it. Should I share it now or wait to see if it comes up in one of your others?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I just remember that we went for a special calling together of the presenters in Snowmass. And we did some very intimate sharing, very personal, and listening to one another. And then in the evening, one of the gentlemen said, Father Thomas, will you share the jumping mouse with us? And he said, you want me to share the jumping mouse? We all said, yes. So that evening, he brought his little book. I think I have a picture of it. And he sat in this chair at a little table. And he began to, and we sat around him on the floor in a circle. And it was so intimate. It was, and then he read this, The Jumping Mouse, which is a Native American story about a little mouse who goes on his journey to his own transformation. And it was the most tender thing I had experienced with him.
I remember that, Virginia. And I think at one point, towards the end, he was a little teary almost, reading about the transformation of the mouse and the eagle. It was very, very touching. And I think it showed his deep humanness and his love.
Right. And we sat in silence afterwards because he had to get some control. And we just were in wonder for, I don't know how long we sat in silence together, but it was very touching.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You know, honestly, I don't remember where this quote is from. I am guessing it might be from his early book, The Mystery of Christ. I haven't been able to find it in my book that is so underlined. But I think it was an early quote, because some of my earliest cards in the mid-90s had this quote on it. And it's just such a blessed quote. It's kind of a guide. And it's an invitation to trust in God's mysterious presence within us at each moment. And I also think it's a very hopeful quote to know that God is working in us in our ordinary days. For me, it's very encouraging that as I go about my ordinary days, whatever I'm doing, and as Father Thomas says, however humble or humdrum, the mystery of Christ, God is there with us, working at all times. And I just saw the Spirit working through everything in those gatherings that we had with Father Thomas, and his how everybody just kind of was in awe of his words. He was such a brilliant man, but again, so transformed with love. And I think Virginia was, we were together in the mid-90s.
Right.
Was it Boston?
We were in Chicago the last time, but I'm not, was that when we began the Minnesota Contemplative Outreach? That was
when we began Minnesota Contemplative Outreach. But you and I met on the bus, I think in Boston.
Okay.
It was somewhere between 95 and 97. And there was 2 conferences, 2 years in a row there. And we met there. And I know that's when I started playing with Father Thomas's quotes. And I did ask him, I think it must have been somewhere around 94, 95, for permission to use his quotes in my artwork. And I did share the artwork with him. And contemplative outreach, on many of the conferences, I would do a bookmark with one of his quotes, and he would sign it, and then they would reproduce it for all of us. And I've got one here. This is one of my favorite quotes. Divine love waits for us to give its immense energy an occasion to flow. And it is signed by Father Thomas at the bottom. So it was just a wonderful encouragement for people, I guess, to have these. But the quote itself, divine love waits. I mean, that says a lot about divine love. Just waiting so patiently for us, loving us as, yeah. And Father Thomas taught us that, how God loves us so much. And I don't know if I said this before, but I do remember Father Thomas's very words that God, that our idiosyncrasies endear us to God. God is that loving, that patient. Again, that's what Father Thomas taught us.
And I remember in the very beginning, the first videos that he made, he used very masculine language. I mean, his humility was that he listened to the suggestions of the women to be a little more feminine. And it was very touching how he did change his language, and he became the balance of the feminine and the masculine was just a wonder to me as how he integrated that after being, living with monks for so long and then having women coming and be more part of his ministry. He really respected each of us, and that was very touching to me to see the humility of a man like him to transform into this whole balance of life. The other very humble moment that Meredith and I shared was the last gathering that we had here in Transfiguration Parish. And as we were eating breakfast together the next morning, Meredith and I were talking with him. And then I said, Father Thomas, what word of wisdom do you have for us now that you are in this aging process? He was silent. And then he said, God is all there is. That was it. I just held that in my heart. God is all there is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
This quote, God joins us wherever we are, just as we are, and only asks us to be who we are. I found in my notes at one of the conferences we were at, and it might have been one where Sister Virginia and I were together. I don't know for sure whether it came from one of his books and I was just remembering it and included it in my notes, but I opened my book to read some of my notes, and I've got so many notes. And here, this quote hopped out. God joins us. And again, I think speaking about gifts, we all have different gifts. And the Spirit uses each of us in a different way with our gifts, invites us, as Father Thomas said, waits for us to give it immense energy and an occasion to flow. And so I do believe that, the Spirit in some way was using my art to add a dimension of meaning or emphasis to Father Thomas's words. But I also believe that the Spirit was working through Father Thomas at all of these conferences, these retreats, to touch each person's heart, and so that each person could go out and use their gift as the Spirit was inviting them to use them. The other thing I remember, and this might have been at one of those retreats in the chapel, or one of the gatherings of the elders in Snowmass in the beautiful chapel. And I remember it was an evening. So, and we were gathering after supper, and I was the last one to come into the room. And there was only one chair left in the circle. And so I sat, and it was right next to Father Thomas. And so that's where I had to sit. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have chosen that. But I do remember him. I remember him talking and sharing with us very deeply, but I don't remember a thing he said, because sitting next to him and our shoulders were almost touching because the chairs were so close together, all I could feel was the love emanating from him, the love of God, that he was a transmitter. He transmitted God's love to us. So I don't know if you remember that time, Virginia, or not.
Very much remember that. And what a blessing that you got to sit by Father Thomas. But that evening was so deep. And one of the men recorded it, and I do have it someplace. But that was the evening, the first time I ever heard him talk about the cosmic world. And he went deep with that for the first time, which was, a whole new way of listening to him, and how that transformation was, moving him deeper and deeper into the environment and the world, beyond. So that was a beautiful time. A time before that, Meredith, when I fell and broke my wrist, I ended up in Aspen at the hospital. And next morning, Father Thomas called me, said, "Oh, Virginia, do you need to go home?" And I said, "No, Father Thomas, I'm coming back. I'll be there." And for me, that was the retreat that gave me a deep transformation. And having broken my wrist, it was like something went deep into me. And I began to have tears during one of the centering prayer times. And I just sat there and I thought, I need the group to support me. So I need to stay here, even though I'm crying. And after everybody left, I went into the next room and just sat on a chair. One of the retreat directors came in after some time and gently touched me on my back and just said, "I'm just going to be here with you, Virginia. You don't need to talk." And then the tears really came. But what happened to me in that time was that I was taken to a deep unconscious memory. The unloading of the unconscious was very clear. And at the end of that retreat, I had a deep healing and a deep transformation in my own life. And it was because of Thomas's deep love and concern for each of us that that was just a gift of relationship and friendship.
That's a beautiful memory, Virginia. Thank you for sharing that. Father Thomas was so kind and so thoughtful. He did those things like give you a phone call to check on you. We had a son who died in 92, and I remember that Father Thomas called me at home. It was actually, I think, the day of the funeral, after the funeral, and he talked to me for an hour on the phone. With his kindness and his listening, he wanted to hear about this son of ours and said that he, from my description, he was far beyond the knowledge for his age that probably added to his death. But such kindness to call me. And also, he called me after I broke my hip in Italy. And I think I was home at that time, but I was in the hospital. And again, in his very kindness and his deep listening, he was brilliant, but he listened so lovingly. It was just a gift, but I think it shows his deep love for all of the people that he met and worked with.
I think it was such an affirmation of your picture, of your art. God joins us where we are, and Thomas joined us where we were.
Well said.